28th, 1940. After only 18 days of fighting, the Allied armies in Europe have been smashed by the Nazis. A German invasion of Britain now looks inevitable. The 5 men of the British War Cabinet consider their options. The former Prime Minister, Neville Chamberlain, and the Foreign Secretary, Lord Halifax, are arguing for peace talks with the Nazis. This seems entirely sensible. Britain might hang on to her independence and most of the empire. Winston Churchill has been Prime Minister just 2.5 weeks. He is contemptuous. Hitler would reduce Britain to a slave state with a puppet government. Labour's Clement Attlee backs Churchill. His deputy, Arthur Greenwood, a figure forgotten in history, is with them too. And so the decision is made: Britain will fight on. Churchill then calls together the full cabinet. If this Long Island story of ours is to end at last, he says, let it end only when each one of us lies choking in his own blood on the ground. There's a pause, a great roar. People are in tears. This is a blood pact, drawing in not only the men in the room, but everybody. Britannia, the old conqueror island, isn't going to go down easily. Stand together, fight to the end. It's 10 past midnight on Monday the 27th of May 1940, and the telephone is ringing at the home of a chartered accountant called Basil Smith. It's the Admiralty calling. Operation Dynamo is underway. Basil Smith set off for the boathouse where his 24-foot motor launch, Constant Nymph, was moored. Everything unnecessary, china, cutlery, pots and pans, had already been stripped out and stored. He was just waiting for his naval permit. He said the officer in charge didn't seem to think there was any tremendous hurry. Across the Channel, the British and French armies, hundreds of thousands of men, were in full retreat. And their only chance of escape was by sea. German bombers were trying to close down the nearest port, still held by the Allies, Dunkirk. After a 20-mile march, Private Fred Barker and his platoon clambered to the top of the sand dunes. We stood stock still in astonishment, he said. There were lines and lines of thousands of men, all waiting to be evacuated.
Suddenly, some of the men around him were seized by panic and began to run down the beach towards any boat they could see. Their officer roared at them to stop. Stand fast, form ranks, he shouted. But more men began desperately to run down the beach. The officer then pulled his revolver and threatened to shoot the next man who broke the line. Basil Smith was now heading out to sea with a full tank of fuel and a crew of 2 naval ratings. 4 months in the Navy, never been to sea, took to it like ducks to water. But what it was they were actually going to be doing, he had no idea. Whatever it was, he'd been assured by the pleasant-voiced man from the Admiralty it would be dangerous.
The men on the Dunkirk beaches could only be reached by the shallowest craft.
Thousands were standing here in rows, 4 deep, waiting day and night to be rescued. And when the tides came in, they were up to their necks in water. One young private said he counted 3 tides. We had to keep our cigarettes and matches in our helmets to keep them dry, said another. It was blazing hot, and we had nothing to drink.
The little ships were coming to the rescue.
A motley flotilla of hundreds of yachts, cockle boats, fishing smacks and pleasure cruisers, with names like the Richmond, the Resolute and Queen Boadicea, and no fewer than 11 boats called the Skylark.
Basil Smith reached Dunkirk at dusk. Strafed by fighter planes, the little ships and hundreds of rowing boats tirelessly ferried exhausted men from the beaches to the larger ships waiting to take them home. Under heavy shelling, men fell overboard, some were crushed to death, many drowned. Constant Nymph helped to get around 900 soldiers off the beach before she had to be abandoned. Basil Smith sailed home on a merchant ship, still under heavy fire.
Plenty of hot tea and bread and butter and jam, and a chance to light a pipe made me perfectly indifferent to anything Jerry did. Basil Smith had just defined the spirit of Dunkirk.
Over 9 days, the flotilla of 900 naval and civilian craft rescued over 1/3 men from the beaches of northern France. It was a resounding military defeat, but it was also a kind of miraculous deliverance. On Tuesday, the 4th of June, Winston Churchill turned the Dunkirk spirit into a founding legend of modern Britain.
We shall fight on the beaches, we shall fight on the landing grounds, we shall fight in the fields and in the streets, we shall fight in the hills. We shall never surrender.
The British Empire now stood alone against the might of the German military machine.